They thought fire could silence what they feared, but flames cannot kill truth. In a village shadowed by ancient trees and older fears, people spoke in hushed voices about things they didn't understand. Whispers held more power than facts. Suspicion grew like weeds around those who walked alone, those who healed with herbs instead of prayers, those who danced beneath the moon instead of bowing to the sun. And in the heart of this fear stood Nkiru. Nkiru was not born into power or privilege. She lived on the edge of the village in a modest hut woven from reeds and memory. Her mother had been a healer, her grandmother too, women who understood the ways of plants, the rhythm of seasons and the language of pain. They had been respected once, when healing was still called a gift. But times changed. The old became suspect. The wise became dangerous. And Nkiru inherited not just the knowledge of her bloodline, but also the weight of its suspicion. She was quiet, always watching. She never married, never bore children, never attended the village rituals with the enthusiasm demanded of every woman. Instead, she spent her days tending to the sick, speaking with animals, reading weather in the clouds. Her cures worked, but they were never enough. If she healed a fever, the villagers asked why she couldn't prevent the next one. If she saved a child, they wondered what price the spirit world would ask in return. It began slowly. A missing goat. A stillborn calf. A child who cried at night and pointed at shadows. The elders, ever eager to explain the unexplainable, began to murmur her name. Nkiru, they said, as if the word itself was an incantation. Nkiru is not like us. Nkiru knows too much. Nkiru must be the reason. There was no trial. No chance to speak. Just a night chosen at random when the air smelled too still and the moon hid behind clouds. The village gathered with torches and shouts, fear disguised as righteousness. They marched to the edge of the village where her hut lay quiet, wrapped in moonlight and herbs. She had sensed it coming. They always did, those who were hunted, not with the ears or the eyes but with a tightening in the chest, a chill down the spine. They didn't knock. They didn't warn. The fire was swift. The screams louder than the crackling wood. And when the roof collapsed, they cheered, claiming victory not over a woman, but over their own unease. A demon had been purged, they said. Balance restored. But what they didn't know, what they would never imagine, was that Nkiru did not die in that fire. Deep within the forest, past the thorns and the roots twisted like fingers, something ancient stirred. The flames had not claimed her because the ancestors had not allowed it. She was pulled from the edge of death by forces older than the village itself, spirits who had watched for generations as their names were forgotten and their wisdom turned to ash. They whispered to Nkiru in the language of wind and bone, healed her with herbs no living hand had touched, showed her visions through the eyes of owls and snakes. In her brokenness, they planted something stronger than rage. They planted purpose. And so Nkiru lived. She healed. And she remembered. Back in the village, her name faded from daily speech but not from memory. Children were warned not to go near the ruins of her hut. Some claimed to see her shadow by the river. Some heard her voice in the wind. But the elders dismissed it. She's gone, they said. Burned. Cursed. Dead. They believed that fire had ended her. That fear had triumphed over truth. They were wrong. Because truth cannot be killed. It can be buried. Forgotten. Ignored. But not destroyed. And when truth returns, it returns with the ancestors' wrath. Would you like to know what happened when Nkiru came back? Stay with us. Like, comment, and subscribe for more haunting African folktales, stories where the silence breaks, and justice walks in forgotten footsteps. Nwani had always lived on the outskirts of the village, not out of exile but by choice, a quiet life among trees and wild things. Her hut was nestled near a grove of irako trees, a place said to hum with ancient spirits. She lived alone, by her own rules, with nothing but the wind and the occasional visitor seeking her wisdom. When new mothers struggled through childbirth, they came to Nwani. When bones broke or fevers raged, they came. When dreams grew dark, when lovers grew cold, when crops refused to grow, they always came. And she always helped. Her hands moved like water, sure and soft. Her voice was low, her words slow. She never made promises, but somehow her touch brought relief, her herbs brought calm. The elders called her mysterious, but the young women called her wise. To them, Nwani was not a danger. She was a keeper of knowledge the village had long tried to forget, knowledge passed down from grandmothers, not books, from spirits, not priests. But there is a thin line between respect and suspicion, between awe and fear. And all it takes is one shift in the wind to turn gratitude into something darker. It began with a boy named Chuka. He was a bright child, curious and full of mischief. One morning he woke with chills and a strange rash across his arms. His parents, desperate and afraid, ran from one elder to another seeking help. No remedy worked. No prayer soothed him. In panic they did what many do when faced with the unknown, they looked for someone to blame. They remembered Nwani had passed their compound days earlier. That she had spoken to Chuka, ruffled his hair, given him a small charm to keep bad dreams away. It was innocent, a gesture of kindness, but in the light of fear, it became evidence. Soon, whispers curled through the village like smoke. She touched him. She gave him something. She spoke in riddles. The child worsened. He began muttering in his sleep. His mother wept by the fire. His father grew silent, fists clenched and jaw tight. One man fanned the flames, Elder Matsi Duru, a powerful voice among the council. He had never liked Nwani. Said her ways were too old. That she was too proud. That she kept the youth from proper teachings. Matsi Duru had tried to ban her herbs before. Had warned against her dreams. But until now no one listened. Now they were ready to hear him. She has always been dangerous, he told them. You just refuse to see. He stood before the people, face hard as stone, and declared, We have allowed darkness to live among us for too long. A child's suffering is no coincidence. This is the work of witchcraft. And that was all it took. The villagers who had once sipped her healing teas and knelt beside her fire in pain, now turned cold. The fear of losing one of their own clouded their memories. Matsi Duru stirred them with stories of curses and omens, of the dangers of unnatural women. And when fear dances with ignorance, it becomes a weapon. A crowd formed. They marched to the edge of the village, to Nwani's quiet hut beneath the irako trees. She heard them coming, the rustle of feet, the clanging of sticks against shields, the low chanting of frightened people pretending to be brave. She stepped outside, barefoot, eyes calm as if she'd been expecting this all along. Why do you come like this? She asked, her voice like distant thunder. A woman shouted, You cursed Chuka. Another screamed, You walk with spirits. Matsi Duru stepped forward, tall and self-righteous. You have been judged. You are a witch. Nwani did not flinch. She did not run. She simply looked around, at the faces she once helped, the children she once healed, the mothers she once held as they cried. And she said, When you do not understand something, you burn it. But tell me, who will heal you when I am gone? Her words were met with silence. Then fury. The torch was lit. They dragged her away. The sky was heavy with smoke and shame. No trial. No proof. Just fear loud and hot. They bound her, pushed her into her hut, and set it ablaze. As flames roared and wood cracked, many turned away. Some watched. A few wept. They believed they had purged evil from their midst. They believed fire would silence the truth. But they didn't know Nwani had been marked by the ancestors. That her blood carried more than herbs and old songs. That inside her, something ancient stirred, something not easily extinguished. She did not scream. She did not beg. And when the fire died down and only ash remained, the villagers returned to their lives, unaware that something had survived. In the silence that followed, the wind carried a whisper. She is not gone. And when she returns, the truth will burn brighter than any flame. If you're still here watching, waiting, this story is only beginning. Like, comment, and subscribe for more chilling African folktales that remind us, not all fires consume. Some awaken. The day of the burning began with drums, not the kind for celebration, but the deep, angry kind that echoed through the belly. The village had gathered, restless and boiling over with fear. Nwani stood at the center of it all, hands bound with woven rope, head held high despite the shame they tried to pour on her. Her eyes scanned the crowd, and for a moment she saw them, not the mob they had become, but the individuals they once were. There was Obinna, whose fever she had broken when everyone else gave up. Nkem, who brought her wildflowers after Nwani saved her baby. Ijeoma, who had wept in her arms after her husband's betrayal. Faces she had known. Faces that now turned away, unable to meet her gaze. Matsi Duru stood with a staff in one hand and judgment in the other. His voice rang out across the square, filled with conviction. The spirits have shown us the truth. Her evil poisons our children, clouds our future. She is not one of us. She is the reason we suffer. I am not a witch, Nwani said loud enough for all to hear. Her voice did not tremble. I have only ever given what was asked of me. When you came with pain, I gave you peace. When you came with questions, I offered clarity. But now, in your fear, you twist my care into curses. A murmur rolled through the crowd, some uncertain, some uneasy. But Matsi Duru was relentless. Even now she uses her words to cast spells. Even now she speaks in riddles to deceive. Look at the child. Look at what she did. They brought Chuka out, limp and sweating in his father's arms. His mother knelt beside him, sobbing. She touched him, she cried, and he changed. He was healthy before. And now? Nwani asked softly. Now you believe fire will cure what you fear to name. It was not a question. It was a truth no one wanted to hear. They dragged her to the edge of the village, to the grove where her hut stood, a place where herbs once grew in tidy rows, where charms hung from trees like quiet prayers. The hut was humble, a patchwork of love and solitude. It had been her sanctuary. It would now be her prison. They shoved her inside. Some said, "Turn away. Don't watch." Others stayed, needing to see. One young girl, barely more than a child, whispered to her mother, "She helped me walk again." The mother yanked her away. And then, the torch. It touched the dry grass and the fire licked hungrily upward, taking hold fast. The hut moaned as if protesting. Smoke curled into the sky like a serpent. The villagers backed away, some muttering prayers, others simply staring. Inside the hut, Nwani closed her eyes. The heat pressed against her skin like judgment. But instead of panic, she found something else. A memory, ancient and buried. A dream from childhood where her grandmother's voice whispered, "One day they will fear you. Not because you harm them but because you know too much. If that day comes, remember this, ashes can feed the roots of power." As the fire roared, the ground trembled beneath her. A voice, not her own, not human, rose inside her. Not a scream. A call. The villagers saw the flames shoot higher than any they had seen before. They heard a strange sound, a howl that wasn't quite an animal nor a person. And then, silence. When it was over, they approached the charred remains, careful as if something might still leap out. The hut was gone, reduced to ash and smoke. The trees nearby had scorched bark and the herbs were crisp and black. But there was no body. No bones. No cloth. No trace of Nwani. Only her woven anklet, lying in the soot, still warm. She must have burned completely, someone said. Or the spirits took her, whispered another. Matsi Duru scowled. She is gone. Let her name be struck from our mouths. Let her memory rot like her sins. From that day forward, it was forbidden to speak of her. Children were warned not to wander near the grove. Mothers hissed if their daughters asked about the woman who helped. Nwani's name was erased from stories, from records, from prayer lists. It was as if she had never existed. But some things refused to be buried. Late at night, wind would curl around huts like fingers. Dogs would whimper at nothing. Babies would wake screaming, pointing at shadows no one else could see. The grove remained, silent and thick with tension. No one dared build on it. No one dared look directly at it. They thought fire had ended her. They thought silence could erase her. But some spirits are not so easily cast away. In the stillness that followed, the village began to fray in small ways. Crops that once bloomed began to wither. Disputes between families grew sharper. People spoke of a heaviness in the air, a presence watching. And far away where the smoke had once risen, something stirred beneath the soil, something waiting not for revenge but for reckoning. They thought Nwani was gone. But she had only just begun to rise. And the ancestors were rising with her. Like, comment and subscribe for more chilling African folktales, because some fires spark more than fear. They awaken forgotten truths. The first sign came quietly, a goat went missing, then 2 chickens, then a dog. At first no one noticed. Then a farmer rose before dawn to check his traps and found the carcasses of his livestock laid in a circle, their eyes wide open, staring toward the grove. He stumbled back in horror, whispering a prayer, but even his words felt brittle in the heavy morning air. The second sign came with the trees. They began to die, not all at once but like a slow creeping rot. Leaves curled into fists, bark split open as if something inside wanted out. The village healer mixed herbs and poured libations, but the trees remained silent, weeping black sap that no one dared touch. Then came the dreams. People who had once cheered the burning awoke soaked in sweat, trembling, unable to speak of what they saw. Nwani came to them in sleep, her eyes glowing like embers, her voice layered with others too many to name. She did not speak threats. She simply stood in their huts, watching. Silent. Waiting. Some said she wept. Others claimed her face split in two, revealing a screaming void beneath. Whatever the visions were, they grew worse with each night. The elders gathered in secret, hoping to contain the fear. They told the villagers it was nothing, just unrest in the spirit world. Do not give it power by speaking of it, Duru warned. Let the wind blow past. Let the darkness fade. But the darkness did not fade. The children were next. They began to speak in tongues, strange languages not even the oldest among them could place. One girl, barely 6, sat beneath the irako tree and sang a song that no one taught her. The melody curled around the villagers like smoke. When asked where she learned it, she said, "The lady at the river sang it. She wears a mask and walks on water." That same week, a fisherman returning from the river just before dusk dropped his net in the sand and ran home without a word. When neighbors came to ask what happened, he only shook, his eyes wide. "She's back," he whispered. "She walks with the ancestors." The river had changed too. Mist rolled over its surface even on the hottest days. The fish vanished. Birds no longer perched on the trees near its banks. And at night, a single figure stood knee-deep in the water, unmoving, a mask of bone covering her face, robes dragging through the current like shadows. The villagers whispered behind closed doors. Some began to leave, fleeing to neighboring villages. But others stayed, rooted in fear, guilt, or pride. One morning, thunder cracked so loudly that it split a large stone at the village's center, a stone that had stood for generations as a marker of peace. Rain did not follow. The air remained thick, too still, too warm. That was when the oldest woman in the village, blind and near her last breath, declared, "She walks again. And she is not alone." That night the drums beat without hands. No one dared approach them, yet they sounded in perfect rhythm, slow and deep, funeral drums. The next day footprints appeared in the grove, bare feet, heavy and burned at the edges, walking in and out of the ash. The elders sent a young man to investigate. He returned wild-eyed, whispering, "The ground hums. I heard voices from beneath. They were calling her name." Duru gathered the elders again. Some wanted to flee. Some wanted to perform another cleansing ritual. But he stood firm. "We made a decision. We declared her a witch. We ended it." But someone finally asked, "What if we were wrong?" He had no answer. One brave woman, Igioma, the same who once cried in Nwani's arms, stood before the villagers and said, "We must speak her name. We must remember what we did." And she did. Aloud she said, "Nwani." The wind roared. The trees trembled. The sky darkened. And from the grove came laughter, not mocking but sad. Ancient. The kind that knows too much. The villagers ran, hid, or fell to their knees. When night fell, the woman in the mask walked through the village. She said nothing. But she paused in front of each home, stared for a moment and then moved on. Those she passed by heard whispers in the walls that night. "Do you remember what you did? Do you know what you chose? Would you do it again?" Children cried. The strong wept. The proud fell silent. By dawn the village was still. No one spoke. No one dared. They had tried to burn a woman. But she returned, cloaked in the memories of what they'd done, accompanied by spirits who remembered every lie, every betrayal, every silence. And now they all waited, not for vengeance but for acknowledgement. Because truth, once burned, returns with a hunger. And Nwani was no longer just a woman. She was every ancestor ever wronged. And she had come to collect what was owed. The visions began slowly, flickers in oil lamps, shapes in the smoke of cooking fires, faces in reflections. Then all at once they became impossible to ignore. The first to speak of it was a boy named Obinna. Only 9 years old, quiet and thoughtful, with the kind of silence that made elders smile. One morning he walked into the center of the village, eyes wide and white, voice deeper than his years, and said, "She is not alone. They walk with her now." No one understood. They thought it was play. But then he began to prophesy. He told Duru that the ancestral mask buried in his compound would rise again, that the earth beneath his home would open and show what was hidden. He told Mama Eek that the child she lost long ago had been taken, not by fever but by silence. And then in a voice not his own he said, "You burned the wise. You will now listen." From that day on, Obinna never spoke like a child again. Each night the drums returned, louder than before. No hands touched them. They sat untouched on their stands, but their rhythm was steady. They spoke in the language of the dead, and even those who didn't understand felt it in their bones. Pregnant women clutched their bellies tighter. Warriors laid down their spears. The wind began to sing. Not with words but with memory. It carried voices from the past, forgotten names, hidden regrets. A man confessed to a crime from decades ago, weeping at his compound gate, claiming he heard his late mother's voice in the trees. The river swelled unnaturally, rising and falling with no rain, and its waters shimmered with strange colors under the moonlight. And fire. Fire began to behave like a living thing. One night, a cooking fire in the home of an elder rose suddenly, licked the roof without burning it, then split into 3 flames. The flames danced in circles before extinguishing with a sound like a sigh. The elder collapsed to his knees. "She is among us," he said. Nwani did not return as herself, at least not the self the village remembered. She now walked as a vessel, a mouthpiece for the restless spirits. Her steps were light, her skin marked with ash that no water could wash away. Where she walked, the earth responded. Leaves turned to face her path. Stones shifted under her feet. She came to the meeting square one dawn, standing beneath the same tree where judgment had once been passed. No one dared stop her. Her presence was not anger, it was reckoning. The child, Obina, stood beside her. And then the spirits began to speak. Through the boy, through the wind, through the flames in every hearth, they told their stories. A midwife who had healed hundreds but was cast aside for challenging a male elder. A hunter whose death had been blamed on witchcraft, though it was envy that set the trap. A girl who died in childbirth after being denied herbs from Nwani's care. One by one their voices filled the village. You feared what you did not understand. You chose silence over justice. You burned the wise. The villagers wept openly. Even those who once stood proudly at the burning now trembled. The oldest among them fell to the ground, clutching their chests, as if feeling every decision again. Nwani raised her hand. Silence followed. She did not speak with rage, nor did she scream. She simply said, "You were warned." Then the rain came. Not the storm of punishment, but a cleansing rain, heavy and warm, that washed away the ash and soot from every corner of the village. Children danced in it, laughing, while elders stood frozen, unsure whether to join or pray. That night, Nwani walked through the village, touching each home with her palm. Some walls cracked open, revealing buried objects, dolls, tokens, old bones. Others remained still. She made no judgment aloud, only left behind symbols, chalk drawings that glowed faintly in the dark. And when the sun rose, every villager found a mark near their home. A circle meant forgiveness. A spiral meant a lesson still to be learned. An X meant silence had done harm. Each person was forced to reflect, to remember, to question. It was then the villagers realized, this was not vengeance. This was the wrath of truth. This was what happened when ancestors were ignored, when knowledge was burned, when fear led to violence. This was what happened when they labeled a woman a witch not because of what she had done, but because of what they did not want to understand. Nwani had returned, yes, but it was not to destroy. It was to awaken. In the days that followed, changes swept the village. The elders called a meeting, not in secret but before everyone. Apologies were made. Names once banned were spoken again. Rituals of atonement were held, not with pride but with humility. Obina's voice returned to its youthful pitch, though the memory of the spirits never left his eyes. Nwani? She walked to the grove one final time. The place where her hut once stood now bloomed with wildflowers. No one followed her, but they watched from a distance as she knelt, pressed her forehead to the earth, and whispered something no one could hear. She vanished into the mist beyond the trees. But every so often, when a new child is born, or when justice teeters on the edge of silence, the drums return for a single night. And the villagers remember. You can burn a home. You can silence a name. But you cannot kill the truth. Not when it walks with the ancestors. The truth, when it comes, does not arrive with thunder or lightning. It slips in quietly, like a shadow beneath a closed door, unseen until it is too large to ignore. And in the case of Nwani, the truth had waited patiently, tucked behind years of silence, whispers and well-fed lies. But truth has a way of surfacing, especially when the ancestors themselves demand it. It was the child, Obina, who spoke first, again in that trance-like voice that had become more familiar than feared. On the morning after the village rain, when chalk symbols still clung to the walls and many sat with heads bowed in contemplation, Obina stood beneath the same judgment tree where Nwani had been condemned. He pointed a small hand at Elder Okizi, the eldest among the council, the one whose voice had thundered loudest during the witch-burning trial. You feared her light, Obina said, voice deep and ancient, because it was brighter than your own. Gasps echoed around the gathering square. Okizi's face tightened, but he did not speak. Obina continued. You planted the rot. You whispered to the earth. You crafted the sickness. Silence fell like a dropped stone. And then an old woman stepped forward. Matsi Olama, the midwife who had once worked beside Nwani before being quietly pushed aside. Her body bent with time, but her voice was steady. I saw the herb roots by the child's sleeping mat, she said. I knew what they were. They do not grow wild here. They do not bring healing. They bring suffering. Another gasp. Heads turned. I said nothing then, Olama added, her voice trembling. Fear kept my mouth shut. Okizi took a step back. You dare accuse me now after all these years? But the crowd had already shifted. The people were no longer looking at the boy or at Olama. They were looking at one another, remembering. Someone whispered, he told us she cursed the child. Another, he forbade her from attending the birthing grounds. Another still, he said her herbs were dangerous. But they healed my mother. The murmurs built like a storm, not of rage but of awakening. Pieces clicked. Stories once buried returned to the surface. A young man named Ikin stood up. I remember the night the child fell ill. I saw Okizi near the shrine, burying something. I thought it was a blessing for the ancestors. But now I wonder. The air grew heavy. The ancestors stirred. And then, as if summoned by truth itself, the wind returned. It circled the square in a slow spiral, lifting dust and leaves, whistling low, mournful notes that curled around the villagers like a warning. Obina's voice rose again, but this time it cracked. He clutched his chest as if struggling to contain the flood of voices within him. She never cursed the child, he said, tears in his wide eyes. She loved this village. The truth landed like a final drumbeat. Nwani's name, once banned, echoed through the village, spoken in shame, in grief, in awakening. Faces turned toward Okizi, and for the first time in his long life he was the one being judged. The ones who once followed him now stepped away. Okizi tried to speak, to deny it, but his voice caught. And in that pause, in that moment of weakness, everything changed. The villagers circled him, not with weapons, not with rage, but with silence. A silence so deep it spoke louder than any cry for justice. It was the silence of regret, of a community realizing they had been led astray. He dropped to his knees. I was afraid, he whispered. She was respected. Listened to. More than me. Always more than me. Tears slid down his cheeks. I wanted them to turn to me. I wanted to be the one they sought for answers. And so, Olama said softly, stepping forward, you sacrificed the one who offered healing for the sake of power. Okizi nodded, broken. The villagers did not cheer. There was no victory in this revelation. Only sorrow. They remembered Nwani's gentle ways. How she had cured fevers with crushed leaves. How she had sung to newborns in their first minutes of life. How her laughter had once filled the market, before suspicion took her voice away. A woman knelt and began to weep openly. A man followed, beating his chest. The sorrow was collective now, woven through every face in the square. Shame like rain washed over them all. We wronged her, someone whispered. We believed too quickly, said another. She was burned because we chose comfort over truth. In the days that followed, the village did what it could. They returned to the grove where her hut had once stood. With their own hands they cleaned the soil, scattering herbs Nwani once favored. They built a stone circle there, not as a shrine but as a place of memory. At night, people came to speak their truths to the circle, to admit their fears, to honor the voice that had once been silenced. They invited Olama to teach again, and her first lesson was not about herbs, it was about listening. She taught them to pause before fear, to ask before accusing, to heal before punishing. As for Okizi, he remained in the village, but he stepped down from the council. No one forced him. He simply knew. He tended the memory circle daily, watering the plants, clearing the leaves. Some forgave him. Others did not. But Nwani's story had shifted them all. Obina stopped prophesying. His voice returned to his own, and he became a child again, though wiser, quieter. Sometimes he'd walk by the memory circle and place a stone there. No one asked why. And Nwani? She was never seen again. But in dreams she came to the grieving. In rain her voice was heard. In healing her touch returned. The ancestors had made their judgment, not of punishment but of exposure. They had torn the veil between truth and fear. The fire had not claimed her. It had revealed them. And now, at last, they listened. The path to the sacred shrine was not one often walked, for it lay deep in the forest where light filtered in through ancient trees, and the air pulsed with the breath of the ancestors. That morning, as the mist clung low and the birds held their songs, the entire village walked in silence. No drums, no chants, only the sound of feet pressing against soil damp with yesterday's truth. At the head of the procession walked Elder Olama, now regarded as the village's spiritual guide, and beside her, the child Obina, whose eyes still held echoes of voices not his own. The village followed behind them, humbled and afraid, carrying offerings, calabashes of water, carved figurines, herbs once burned in ignorance, now brought in hope. And then from the shadows of the trees she came. Nwani. She did not wear the tattered clothes of a beggar, nor the bones of vengeance. Instead she came barefoot, wrapped in a robe of deep earth and sky blue, the colors of healing and mourning. Her hair had grown long and wild, threaded with silver beads and leaves. Around her neck, a single pendant pulsed softly, an ancestral charm that shimmered as she passed. But more than her appearance, it was her presence that silenced the birds entirely. The air changed. The wind curved around her like it remembered her name. She carried no staff, no symbol of anger or retaliation. She came unarmed. As she reached the grove where the shrine stood, stones encircling a hollow tree older than any living soul, she knelt. Not in submission but in acknowledgement. This place had once known truth, and it was here truth would be reborn. The villagers formed a wide circle. None dared come too close. The fire at the center of the shrine burst into flame on its own, licking toward the sky in white-hot tongues. Smoke rose, not acrid but sweet, scented with kola nut, cassia bark and crushed hibiscus. Then came the voices. They did not echo from the trees or the mouths of those present, but from the flames themselves. The air thickened, and the world seemed to tilt as ancestral spirits descended, visible only to the soul. Their presence pressed against the hearts of the guilty, the silent, the complicit. "You summon judgment," one voice said. It was not male or female, young or old, it was all of them at once. "You will now face it," said another. A gust of wind parted the crowd, and Nwani stood again, eyes glowing faintly with a light that came from within, not without. "I did not come for revenge," she said, her voice steady. "I came for reckoning." The spirits turned to the villagers. "Your sin was not in flame but in silence. Not just against her but against the many before her. The women whose names were swallowed. The truths buried beneath fear. You burned one but buried 100 more. The ground beneath them trembled, not with threat, but with awakening." Elder Olama stepped forward. "Then let truth rise." The spirits spoke and the cleansing began. One by one the villagers were called to speak, not to confess sins but to remember. They spoke of grandmothers whispered to be witches, of mothers who knew too much about herbs and were cast aside, of sisters whose strange dreams were silenced with shame. They spoke and the air lightened. Nwani listened. She did not nod, did not judge. She only listened. Then the spirits turned to Okizi. "Do you carry regret or only shame?" The old man trembled. "I carry both," he said, voice cracking. "I let envy drown wisdom. I silenced what I feared would surpass me. And I poisoned a child's fate to protect a lie." "Then speak her name," the spirits commanded. He fell to his knees and whispered, "Nwani." "No," the flames hissed. "Say it not as burden, but as honor." He looked up, tears falling freely now. "Nwani who healed the sick, who sang to the trees, who dared to know more than I ever would." The fire roared, then softened. The spirits turned back to Nwani. "You came to destroy," they said, "but you chose to restore." "Why?" She closed her eyes. "Because anger would burn me too. And I still love this village even if it once hated me." The fire dimmed into embers. "You are not just the wronged. You are the witness, the keeper of memory." Then the spirits asked the final question. "Shall judgment fall or shall healing rise?" And Nwani, after a long silence, raised her hand and scattered powdered leaves into the embers. They sparked, flared, then faded into blue smoke. "Healing," she said. "But only if they vow never to silence another woman again." The villagers, one by one, dropped to their knees. "We vow," they whispered. Obina stepped forward, placed a single kola nut in the center of the circle, and said, "Let this be the seed of a new truth." The wind blew once more and the ancestors withdrew. The fire died not in smoke but in light. Nwani did not return to the village. She walked deeper into the forest, vanishing into mist, her shape dissolving like morning dew. No one followed. No one dared. But her story remained. The shrine was renamed the Circle of Remembrance. Every season the villagers gathered there, not to seek favor from spirits, but to tell the stories they once feared. And when children asked who Nwani was, they were told. She was the one we tried to burn, but who returned to teach us what it means to be truly alive. The ancestors had judged. But it was the village that had been changed. Nwani stood at the center of the village, her form an embodiment of both ancient wisdom and the power of the earth itself. The air around her was thick with the weight of history, but her presence was calm, rooted in something deeper than any fear the villagers might have once held. The spirits had spoken, and now it was her turn. The fire had smoldered to a soft glow, its embers crackling in the morning light. The villagers, still trembling from the spiritual trial, knelt before her, not as a woman to be feared, but as a figure of unyielding truth. There was no anger in her, no vengeance. There was only a steady resolve, a powerful stillness that commanded respect. The world seemed to hold its breath. With her arms outstretched toward the sky, Nwani spoke, her voice clear and strong, yet gentle in its delivery. Listen to me, all of you. You have been taught the wrong lessons for too long. You have learned to fear what you do not understand. And in your ignorance, you have burned the wise, silenced the healers, and forsaken the knowledge that could have saved you. A chill wind swept through the crowd, and the earth seemed to hum with agreement. The spirits, invisible but ever-present, lingered at the edges of the grove, waiting for her to speak the words they had carried through the ages. The fire you set for me did not burn the truth. It only fed it. The flames were not my death but my rebirth. And now, it is time for a new covenant to be forged, one built on the lessons of the past. She paused, letting her words settle like dew on the parched earth. The villagers, once fearful of her, now held their breath in anticipation, eager for her next command. No more will you burn the ones who heal. No more will you silence those who see the world through a different lens. No more will you cast out the ones who dare to speak the truth that unsettles you. The villagers murmured, but Nwani held up her hand and the noise ceased. The power in her presence was undeniable. You will build a new shrine, she continued, not for worship but for remembrance. A place to honor the wisdom that was nearly lost. A place to remind you that silence is not peace and ignorance is not strength. The elders exchanged uneasy glances, but none dared speak against her. She was not a woman to be bargained with, she was a force, a truth that could no longer be denied. The weight of the spirits, the earth, and the ancestors themselves pressed upon them, urging them to accept the covenant she offered. The shrine will stand, Nwani said, not as a place of fear but as a beacon of knowledge. You will come here to remember what was lost and what was gained. You will come here to acknowledge the women, the seers, the healers, the ones who walked this earth with wisdom in their hearts and healing in their hands. They were not witches. They were not demons. They were the guardians of your well-being, the keepers of balance. She took a step forward, her gaze steady as she met the eyes of the villagers. And the children will learn the truth. They will learn to never again look at the world with fear, to never again label someone as evil because they are different. You will teach them that knowledge is not a curse but a gift. The villagers, their heads bowed, nodded in agreement. There was no need for further words. Nwani's power, her presence, had stripped away any resistance, any lingering doubts. She had become the embodiment of truth, and no one could deny the strength of her message. But even as she spoke, Nwani knew that forgiveness did not come easily. The villagers would have to prove their commitment to this new covenant. It would not be enough to merely agree in the moment, they would need to live by the promises they made today. She turned to the children, who stood at the edges of the crowd, their eyes wide with a mix of wonder and fear. You, the next generation, will carry this truth forward, she said, her voice softening. The elders may falter, but you must never forget the lessons learned here today. Silence will not protect you. And those who seek to silence others will never find peace. The children nodded solemnly, some still unsure of what it all meant, but all recognizing that something had shifted in the very fabric of their world. The very air seemed different, charged with a new energy, a new hope. As the villagers left the grove to begin the construction of the new shrine, Nwani stood alone for a moment, looking over the land that had once been the source of her torment. The forest whispered around her, the spirits murmuring in approval. She had not come to destroy but to rebuild. She had not come to seek revenge but to offer redemption. She had given them a new path, a path of understanding, of healing, of truth. It would not be easy for the village to follow this path. Old habits die hard, and the shadows of fear would always linger at the edges of their lives. But the first step had been taken. The covenant had been made. And with that, Nwani turned and walked back into the forest, her form dissolving into the mist as quietly as she had appeared. But her work was far from over. The ancestors were always watching, and the winds of change were beginning to blow across the land. Nwani's name, once a whisper of fear, began to echo through the village as something else entirely, something powerful, reverent, and bound to the earth itself. Her presence was felt even in her absence. She had become a living legend, a figure whose spirit permeated the winds, the storms, and the sacred dreams of those who had once condemned her. She was now the guardian of justice, the protector of truth, and the unwavering force that had challenged an entire community's ignorance. Days passed and the village began to change. The shrine that had been built in her honor stood as a constant reminder of what had been lost and what had been saved. It was no longer just a place of worship. It was a place of learning, of remembrance, and of healing. The villagers came together to rebuild not just their homes, but their way of thinking. The lessons of the past were being woven into the very fabric of their lives. Girls, once seen as potential witches to be feared, were now learning the ancient knowledge of herbs, healing, and history. The elders no longer spoke of them with suspicion, but with respect, recognizing that the wisdom they carried could heal, nurture, and sustain the village in ways they had once been too blind to see. These young girls were being taught not just the ways of the earth but the stories of the past, stories of strength, of survival, and of the power of knowledge. The fire that had once consumed Nwani's hut had become a symbol of purification and rebirth. It was as if the flames had burned away the fear, the superstition, and the ignorance that had plagued the village for generations. In their place there was now a thirst for truth, a hunger for understanding. The villagers who had once feared the very idea of a healer like Nwani now sought her wisdom through the teachings passed down from the elders. But despite the changes, Nwani herself was no longer a constant presence in the village. She had vanished once again, retreating into the mists of the forest, leaving behind only the echoes of her voice in the wind, the whisper of her spirit in the storms, and the guidance she offered in sacred dreams. Her physical form was gone, but her influence was felt in every corner of the village. The air seemed to hum with her presence, as if she were always watching, always listening, always guiding. The children of the village, those who had once been taught to fear her, now spoke of her with awe. They grew up with stories of the woman who had been burned alive but had returned, not for vengeance but for justice. They learned of the spirits who had spoken through her, of the ancestors who had demanded the village face its sins, and of the new covenant that had been forged in the flames. They understood that Nwani had not been a victim but a force that had given them the tools to reclaim their own power. As the years went by, the village began to thrive in ways it never had before. The crops grew bountiful, the children were healthier, and the people were stronger not just in body but in mind. They had learned that true power did not lie in the ability to control others, but in the ability to understand, to heal, and to grow. The young girls, now taught in the ways of Nwani, began to take on roles of leadership and responsibility within the village. They became the new healers, the new seers, the new keepers of knowledge. They were no longer seen as threats, but as essential to the village's well-being. The herbs they grew were used not just for medicine, but for nourishment, for ritual, and for celebration. The history of their ancestors, once hidden and forgotten, was now a source of pride and strength. The old fears had faded, replaced by a new sense of unity. The villagers, who had once been divided by superstition and ignorance, were now united in their understanding that truth, not fear, was the foundation of their survival. They had learned that power could be used for healing, not destruction, for understanding, not fear. And it was this newfound wisdom that kept them thriving. Yet, as much as the village had changed, there were still those who carried the shadow of the past with them. The elder who had led the charge to burn Nwani's hut, he too had changed. His once dominant voice had softened, and his once proud posture had bowed under the weight of his guilt. He had witnessed the transformation of the village, and he knew that he would never fully escape the stain of his actions. He had tried to silence a woman who carried the wisdom of the ages, and in doing so, he had nearly destroyed his people. But even he could not deny the lessons Nwani had taught. He had learned, too, that silence and ignorance were not the keys to power. The true strength lay in understanding, in listening, and in embracing the lessons of the past. And as he stood before the shrine, offering his own silent prayer for redemption, he knew that he would never forget the woman who had shown him the true meaning of power. In the quiet nights, when the wind howled through the trees and the storms rolled in from the horizon, the villagers would gather at the shrine. They would sit in silence, reflecting on the lessons of the fire, of the woman who had come from the flames, and of the ancestors whose voices had guided them. The sound of drums, faint but ever-present, echoed in the distance, a reminder of the bond between the living and the spirits who watched over them. The legacy of Nwani was one that would never fade. Her name was etched into the hearts of the villagers, not as a symbol of fear, but as a beacon of wisdom, strength, and justice. She had taught them that truth could not be burned away. It could only be hidden for a time, and when it was finally revealed, it would rise from the ashes stronger than ever. As the years passed, the village continued to grow and thrive. The children, now adults, passed down the stories of Nwani and the lessons she had taught them. They shared the teachings of the herbs, the wisdom of the ancestors, and the importance of embracing truth over fear. The village had become a place where knowledge was cherished, where silence was no longer a weapon, and where power was used to heal, not harm. And so, the legacy of Nwani lived on, carried forward in the hearts and minds of those who had learned the most important lesson of all, that fire cannot kill truth. It can only reveal it. The tale of Nwani is one that speaks volumes about the destructive power of fear, the dangers of mass judgment, and the way societies often persecute those whose power they don't understand. It is a reminder that the most dangerous force in any community isn't the mysterious or misunderstood power itself. It is the fear that clouds the judgment of those who wield it. Fear, when allowed to fester and grow, leads to irrational decisions, dangerous consequences, and, ultimately, the destruction of those who are different. In Nwani's case, it nearly cost her life, and it nearly cost her village its very soul. The villagers, in their ignorance and their panic, chose to burn her alive, believing that fire could destroy what they feared. But fire did not silence Nwani. It did not kill her. Instead, it ignited a transformation that burned brighter than any flame they could have set. Nwani's resilience was not simply in surviving the fire, she returned stronger than ever. She had survived not only the flames that sought to consume her but also the years of hatred, misunderstanding, and fear that had shaped her life in the village. And when she returned, it was with a power that no one had anticipated, one that was rooted in justice, in truth, and in the strength of the ancestors who had always been by her side. Her return was not just a resurrection, but a revelation, a powerful message to the villagers who had once condemned her. Nwani had become more than a healer, more than a woman accused of witchcraft. She had become the embodiment of the very forces that the villagers had feared. She was the fire that could not be extinguished, the truth that could not be silenced. Her journey, her transformation from victim to powerful force, was a journey of self-discovery and reclamation, a journey that many who had once been silent and invisible could relate to. Through Nwani they found strength in the face of persecution, a voice in the face of oppression, and a future that was no longer bound by fear. The moral of Nwani's story is not simply that truth will always rise from the ashes, it is that truth must be defended. It must be protected, no matter how terrifying or threatening it may seem to others. When we are faced with the choice of silence or truth, it is easy to choose silence. It is easier to remain quiet, to conform to what society expects, to protect our own safety at the expense of our integrity. But silence is a dangerous weapon. It allows lies to fester, it perpetuates injustice, and it silences the voices that need to be heard. Truth, on the other hand, is the weapon of the brave, the bold, and the just. It is the only thing that can set us free, even when it seems like the world is against us. Nwani's resilience in the face of such extreme adversity teaches us that we must never give up on ourselves, no matter the circumstances. Even in the darkest of times, when it seems like the world has turned its back on us, we must stand strong in our truth. It's easy to let fear and judgment define us, but true power lies in the ability to rise above it, to transcend the judgment of others and stand firm in who we are. Nwani did not just survive the fire, she returned from it with a new understanding of her own power, a power that was not defined by the villagers' fears or misconceptions, but by the strength that lay within her all along. And this strength was not just for herself, it was for the village. When Nwani returned, she didn't seek revenge or destruction. She sought justice, healing, and truth. She gave the villagers the opportunity to face their sins, to cleanse themselves of the ignorance that had led them to burn her, and to rebuild their community in the spirit of truth. Through the spiritual trials, the cleansing rituals, and the revelation of the truth behind her persecution, the village was given a chance to redeem itself, to break free from the cycle of fear and silence, and to embrace a new way of living, one that honored the wisdom of its women, the strength of its elders, and the power of its ancestors. But not all stories are as neatly tied together as the villagers might have hoped. Not all journeys lead to instant peace or resolution. Nwani's story is a reminder that the path to justice is not always easy, nor is it always quick. Sometimes the fight for truth and for power requires immense sacrifice. Sometimes we must stand in the face of hatred and persecution, knowing that our voice may be the only thing that can bring about change. And sometimes we must burn for our truth as Nwani did, only to rise again stronger and more powerful than ever before. In light of this, we are forced to ask ourselves, if our truth threatened others, would we hide? Would we retreat into silence, allowing ourselves to be silenced in the name of safety and comfort? Or would we burn for it? Would we stand firm as Nwani did and face the flames head-on, knowing that we cannot let our truth be destroyed, even if it means enduring pain, sacrifice, or even death. The story of Nwani raises this question for each of us. It asks us to confront our own fears, our own silence, and our own complicity in systems that perpetuate injustice. It challenges us to ask, will we stand up for what is right even when it is difficult? Will we speak our truth even when others try to silence us? Will we rise, like Nwani, from the ashes of fear and oppression and become the force of justice that this world so desperately needs? As you reflect on Nwani's story, think about the times in your own life when you've been faced with a difficult choice. Have you hidden your truth to protect yourself, or have you burned for it? In the end, the power lies in your hands, the power to speak your truth, to stand up for what is right, and to never let fear silence your voice. If you've been moved by Nwani's story, I encourage you to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Share your thoughts, your reflections, and your own stories of survival and strength. Let's continue to learn from these haunting African tales and honor the resilience of those who came before us. And remember, fire may burn, but it can never kill truth. The tale of Nwani stands as a timeless reminder of the dangers that arise when fear and ignorance guide the decisions of a community. It speaks to the destructive power of silence, the kind that allows injustice to thrive, and the undeniable force that truth can have, no matter how terrifying it might seem. Nwani's journey is one of resilience, survival, and power, not just surviving the flames that sought to consume her, but returning from them with the strength and wisdom of generations. Her story teaches us that when the world is against you, when your truth is feared and misunderstood, it's easy to fall into silence or hide. But the real power lies in standing firm, even when faced with destruction. Nwani didn't just survive, she returned stronger, transformed, and ready to claim the justice that had been denied to her. Through her, we learn that it is not the fear of fire or the condemnation of others that should define us. It is our unwavering commitment to truth, justice, and what is right. The village's transformation under her influence shows that change is possible, but only when truth is allowed to rise and ignorance is cast aside. Nwani did not seek revenge. She sought justice, understanding, and the healing of a community that had allowed fear to rule for too long. Her resilience, her courage, and her eventual forgiveness are what make her story so powerful. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, we all have the power to reclaim our voice, our strength, and our place in the world. As we reflect on Nwani's story, we are left with an important question. If your truth threatened others, would you hide, or would you burn for it? Would you let fear silence you, or would you rise like Nwani did, stronger than ever before? The power to decide lies within each of us. And so, as we close this chapter, let us remember Nwani's legacy. It is a legacy of strength, truth, and unyielding spirit in the face of adversity. Her story is a reminder that even when society seeks to silence us, our truth can never be extinguished. Let us carry that truth with us, honoring it and living it boldly. If this tale resonated with you, feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Join us as we continue to explore more powerful African folktales that inspire, challenge, and remind us of the strength within us all. Fire may burn, but truth endures.